I'm Jen from Repose, and I'm making a video today on the Psoas Release and Floor Angels. This is a follow-up video to the video on hyperkyphosis and pelvis rib alignment. And it's just a great one to release the psoas and help the upper psoas muscles, help to get the ribs to drop a little bit as the psoas releases. And we're also going to add in a great stretch for the shoulder and the pec muscles. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is, if you saw my hyperkyphosis video where you bring your back lower ribs to the wall and you test how much rounding forward you have when you have your ribs over your pelvis. You're just going to come down to the floor. You're just going to lie on the floor and notice how much of your lower ribs, your back lower ribs, are on the floor. And if your ribs are way out here, this is where I used to be, then they're not down. And just like to bring our ribs back to the wall in the hyperkyphosis video, standing up, we had to take our head and shoulders forward. If we want our ribs to come down, we have to actually lift our head and shoulders off the floor. So you're just going to test whether you have space under your ribs or whether your ribs are down on the floor, just as a before and after test. And then you can roll to the side and come up. We're going to use a bolster and a couple of blankets or something to use as a pillow on top of the bolster. This is not like in restorative yoga where you would back all the way up to the bolster. You're actually going to come forward. I'm not sure my whole legs. Yep, my legs are on the camera. And you want your hamstrings on or close to the floor. Then you're going to come back. And you want the bottom tips of your shoulder blades on the bolster, but the lower part of your ribs is not on the bolster. And then you notice to bring my head back to the bolster, I actually have to kind of like, it's almost like a bit of hyperextension in the neck. I'm reaching my head back, so I don't want that. I want to have something underneath my head. I'm just putting this blanket, and you can make the blanket a little bit higher. You don't want to bring it so high that you're flexing your neck and tucking your chin into your chest like this, but you don't want it going back so your chin's lifted up like that either. So you want to be kind of more or less a neutral curve. The head's a little bit forward. And all we're doing here is just using the space and gravity. We've created a space behind our ribs, and we're using gravity to just allow the ribs to drop towards the floor. We're not going to force them down using force. We're just going to slowly breathe here. You can close your eyes. And you're just allowing gravity and time to release the psoas, allowing the ribs to drop towards the floor. Eventually you kind of want your ribs to sort of hammock. I'm going to force, but you don't want to force, kind of hammock down towards the floor. So you're just breathing here and trying to let go of tension and allow the ribs to draw towards the floor. If your hamstrings or your legs are kind of way up like this, or even a little bit like if your knees are bent and you don't feel like you have good contact between the back of your thighs and the floor, then you just want to elevate the bolster a little bit higher, which means you could put several pillows or blankets on the bolster so that where your shoulder blades are is higher off the ground. You can rest in this position for a long time. When I first started doing this, it would take about 20 minutes before I felt any release. So I'd start off, my ribs would be way up here, and they'd stay here for almost 20 minutes. And after about 20 minutes, I'd get some release, and this would start to happen. Now that I've done it for a long time, it only takes a couple minutes before my ribs start to drop. You can hang out here for however much time you have, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, just starting to get your ribs to drop. And then if we want to add a bit of shoulder movement, you're going to stay in it for a few minutes and get your ribs to drop first. And then you want to keep them down, so you don't want to let them come up as you do the shoulder movement. And you're just going to start with some, it's like snow angels. You're going to take your arms into like a snow angel movement, moving from the shoulder. You notice as my arms get towards the overhead position, they have to leave the floor to keep my ribs down. If I take my ribs up, so I'll show you what happens. If I take my ribs up, my arms will go way back towards the floor, but that wasn't shoulder movement again, that was rib movement. So we're trying to keep the ribs down, and in order to keep the ribs down, the arms may have to come further from the floor. So do this a few times, keeping the ribs where they are. And then we're going to start to add some parameters. So keeping the ribs down, we're going to externally rotate from the shoulder, having a tiny bend in the elbow. So the elbow will lift off the floor and the thumbs will point down. But you're rotating externally from the shoulder, so this way. And you want to drag the thumbs along the floor, still keeping the ribs down. As they come overhead again, the thumbs will leave the floor. I'm just trying to keep that external rotation. Once you've done that a few times, you can add an additional parameter. This is widening of the shoulder blades. So we want to keep a bend in the elbow, because if you have any tendency towards hypermobility, if you use a straight arm, you'll probably go into that hypermobile place. So you want to keep a little bend in the elbow and reach the elbows away from the shoulders. So you're widening. When you do that, you should feel that the shoulder blade or the scapula on your back widen apart from each other. And then you're going to continue the same movement. External rotation, ribs down. You're going to do the snow angel movement. And as you're doing this movement with the arm, you're also reaching the elbow away from the shoulder the entire time, so you keep the shoulder blades wide. You should start to feel this more into the chest muscles, into the pecs. You might even feel it into the bicep, depending on where you're holding your tension. And always, if you find a place that feels particularly sticky, you can always hang out there and take some nice breaths. Trying to breathe into your rib cage. And then always, I like to say to hang out in the Psoas Release for a little bit longer after you've finished doing your snow angels, however many you want to do. The ribs are still dropping. And once you've been here for a while, however long you want to practice, it's nice to get an after picture of lying flat on the floor and seeing how the ribs, whether the ribs are more grounded, the back ribs. So you can gently bend the knees, roll to the side, just scoot the bolster away, and then come back to lying on your back. And notice if you feel the back ribs more on the floor, if the ribs are more down in your body. And although it's not a restorative yoga pose, it is very calming for the nervous system. The psoas has a big connection with our fight or flight response, and releasing the psoas can feel very, very grounding. So I hope you enjoy this video, and that's it. Try it out.